Have the public defender, what do you want to do?
But they filed.
They have.
I'm not waiving.
All right, what do you want to do?
What do you want to do? I'm not waiving. If you want to set up for trial, set up for trial.
All right.
If you want to set up for docket sounding, set up for docket sounding. I'm not waiving in any case. This is an emergency
if I
created
had
by
a
the
rock,
state.
I would throw it at you right now.
This is
Stop pissing me off. Just sit down. I'll take care of it. I don't need your help.
No,
sit
you know
down.
what? I'm the public defender. I have a right to be here, and I have a right to
I
stand
said
and represent
sit
my
down.
clients.
If you want to fight, let's go out back and I'll just beat.
I apologize for how grainy that video is, but that is actual footage from 2023 in a courtroom. That is from their security cameras, which is why it's not incredibly high-quality footage. There are no security cameras in the hallway where the judge and the lawyer went. By the way, it was not in Wisconsin, but does anyone want to guess where that happened? Florida. Had to be Florida, didn't it? True story, in 2023, this judge, John C. Murphy, and an overly obnoxious and aggressive guy, frankly, I wanted to throw a rock at him too, a public defender named Andrew Weinsteck, they get in this spitting match in the middle of court. And as they go out back, I cut the video off before it happens, but literally the bailiffs are going out and breaking up a fight between them. The judge had the public defender up against the wall with an armbar across his throat. The bailiffs break it up, and the whole courtroom starts laughing at him. How many of us have ever been in a spitting contest like that before, and everyone else around us just laughs? These two were so motivated by self-interest, by their own feeling of, I'm strong, I'm in charge here, I'm going to do what I think is right. Truth is, they were driven by their egos, weren't they? They were driven by pride, and everyone else around them just laughs. Truth is, we've all, to some extent or another, experienced that in our own lives. Hopefully we handled it way better than them. But at some point, haven't most of us just felt that extreme anger and just wanted to put the other person in their place? Sociologists are starting to say that we are in a rage epidemic. And it is not just here in America, it is around the civilized world, quote unquote, the technologically advanced world. And so many sociologists are starting to say that part of this might be a result of social media. That because we have this ability to post on Facebook and things in a way that feels more anonymous to us, that it's become more socially acceptable to put our anger out there, to put our rage out there. We don't hide it the way we once did. We just let it all hang out, and because of that, it's become more acceptable, and because of that, it's happening more. A poll done by NPR and IBM together, not a group you'd expect, two groups you'd expect to work together, but they did a thing not long ago, and I don't know their methodology, but they determined that 84% of Americans are angrier than they would have been a generation ago. And it's considered to be because of this social acceptance of being angry all the time. And it's not just an American thing. In Britain, Gallup did some research, and from their report, they concluded this. Shop workers and service staff have reported sharp rises in customer abuse against the retail workers in recent years. And one study showed criminal violence in what they call GP surgeries, basically your walk-in clinics at hospitals, has doubled in the last 5 years. And the one that shocked me the most, reported road rage incidents also increased by 40% from 2021 to 2022. 1 year. And when you think about it, that's during the pandemic lockdowns. And so what a lot of people think is happening at that time is people are mad. They're frustrated. They feel out of control. They feel powerless. And something we've talked about many times is when life feels out of control, we look for what we can control. And when we can't control things, we get frustrated. And anger is not a primary emotion. It's always a result of something else that's going on. So this fear, this lack of control, this frustration comes out as anger. All this starts to come together to a point where in an interview, a counselor, a mental health professional who's named Vanessa Enos, she was interviewed about it, and she said this: "We are afraid to look at our anger. If I slow down and look at why I am really angry and address the fact that maybe it's because I'm anxious or sad or I feel shame or guilt about something," but we don't do that because we might have to do some work and change. It's so much easier to blame everyone else around us than to look inside and think, what's really going on in my heart? Why am I feeling the way I am feeling? Why am I behaving the way I am behaving? It's so much easier to look at that person over there and say it's their fault. So what's really going on sometimes? Pride. I'm sorry to say, but we all deal with it at times. And sometimes we deal with it well, and sometimes, myself included, we slip and we deal with it poorly. But we're in a series here. Keep that thought of pride in the back of your mind. We're almost done. We're coming to the conclusion here, but we have worked our way virtually verse by verse throughout the entire book of James. We're in our home stretch now. Today we are covering all of chapter 4 in a message that I'm going to try to keep pretty short, but we are going through this book, and we're seeing that in James, one of the major focuses of this book, one of the major things that is important is this book is all about integrity. To be the same all the way through. That who we are in church on Sunday morning is who we are in the office on Tuesday afternoon, and who we are with our family on Friday night. That we're one person, and the different areas of our lives are not working against each other and rowing against each other, but we have a unity between these things, and that is integrity at its core. And so last week, we looked at how James is calling these people who had been legitimately victimized by others during a time of oppression. We've talked about this in past. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today. But people who have been victimized, and God says, don't respond by using human wisdom. James tells them, respond by using God's wisdom. And God's wisdom is going to lead to forgiveness, to unity, to healing. Man's wisdom is going to lead to separation. And so today, James is continuing, because remember, these verse things that we use to break it up to help find things better, were added much later. This was one letter. So today's thought builds on last week's thought. Last week, James said, be quick to forgive, quicker to forgive. This week, he's going into, why aren't we? Why don't we want to forgive? And it's because of, often, our pride. So James speaks pretty blunt and harsh. When Carol read that before, anyone else in the room like me just kind of wanting to squirm a little bit? Just kind of wanting to say, ow? Because James does not hold back in chapter 4, does he? He's pretty blunt, but we're not going to go through the whole chapter today, but we're going to look at most of it, and we're going to see. Now, I have a strange habit. We have a lot of visitors today, a lot of people that haven't been here before. I have this weird habit. Wherever there are underlined words in a scripture, if you can read the screen, I ask you to say those out loud with me. You guys ready? So the first few chapters of James 4, or first few verses of James 4. What causes conflicts and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the passions at war within you? It's not from out there, people. It's not because that guy over there is a jerk. Maybe they are. But that's not what's causing your problem. It's coming from inside. You crave what you do not have. You kill and covet, but are unable to obtain it. You quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask. And when you do ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may squander it on your pleasures. In your pride, church, and I'm not talking to Darrow Road, don't feel like I'm signaling you out, but this is what James is writing. In your pride, you think the problem is always somebody else's fault. In your pride, you think that you don't have to be the one to fix it, that they're the one who's a mess. And James is saying, you know what, guys, we're all a mess. Let's do it together. and let's break down this pride, and let's begin to work together. Clearly, James believes that to have healthy relationships, we must battle and we must conquer the pride that is inside of us, the pride that keeps us from being exactly who has created us to be. So we're going to look at 3 quick observations today, a little more harsh message than normal. This is not a fun one, guys, trust me. And observation number 1, to battle pride, we must first turn to God. Because I don't know about you, but I cannot do it on my own. And the more I try to do it on my own, the worse I do, because the more I try to do it on my own, the more I'm saying, well, I got this. Yeah, I'm great. I'm a pastor. I can do this. I don't need you, God. I'll let you know if I need you a little. The more we fail when we do that, because that's the exact worst thing to do. When we're dealing with pride, the best thing to do is look at God and say, God, I'm a mess. I need you to come in here because I can't do this on my own. So what does James say? In verses 7 to 10, he says this, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and weep. Turn your laughter into mourning and your joy into gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will exalt you. Turn to Him, because you ain't going to do it on your own. We had a men's group a few years back in my church, and they challenged the guys. I wasn't leading it. I was sitting in on this one. And the guy who was teaching challenged the guys to come up with a mission statement, how they live their life. It can be a scripture, it can be something else. So they go to the first guy, and he, Micah 6:8 maybe, love, or maybe it's going to be the Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. And they go around to the different people. They come to me, and I looked up and said, I think mine might be, I got this, God, I'll let you know if I need you. Because I do this all the time. Am I the only sinner in the room? Am I the only person who gets proud sometimes and thinks, I've got this? We think we can do anything. We think we can handle it by ourselves. It takes humility to admit a need for God. And I came across the story the other day of something that I found just really interesting. Are any of you familiar with Rebecca Pipert? Sometimes she goes by Becky Pipert. She's a Christian author, does a lot of women's ministry and things. Pretty smart lady. But she interviewed a scientist. And she did not identify the scientist. We don't have an actual picture of this guy. She just interviewed a scientist and asked him his story and things. And he just started right off by saying, I've never felt a need for God. I've always been in control. When I have an issue at work, I call a staff meeting, we work it out. I'm a pretty smart guy. When I run into a problem in my equations and everything, I sit down, I start working, and I can usually find the solution. Basically, this guy was Invictus. He's the captain of his fate and master of his soul. He just didn't need God. God was irrelevant to him. Then he had kids. And his kids got a little bit older. How many parents of teenagers do we have in the room? I'm kind of between that stage right now. My son's 21, my daughter's 10, but you know what it's like when you have a teenager. They want their independence, including from you. So this guy loves his kids, but he's instilled no sort of moral fiber into them, and so he starts to see them make, now they're not like going off becoming drug addicts, nothing like that, but he sees them going off in directions that he knows aren't healthy. So he wants to sit down and kind of counsel them, they want nothing to do with Dad. They just pull back. He goes in the room, they just turn their back on him and things. They want nothing to do with Dad. Which, frankly, some teens kind of go through that. But this guy starts to panic. His whole life he has been in charge. His whole life he always knew what to do. He always knew how to solve it. But he loves his kids. He's passionate about his kids. And all of a sudden this is happening. And I love what the scientist said. His own words, he said, my children have taught me the hardest lesson of my life, that I'm not in control over what matters to me most. It's funny, but it's now when I see that I'm not God, that I see I need some help. The question of whether there is a God has finally started to matter. I've never needed a God before, but now I have something going on in my life that I don't know how to fix. Maybe I need somebody else. Maybe I'm not as large as in charge as I thought. I hope the scientist finds him soon if he hasn't already. But I also know that what he's going through is something that many others have. I don't need God. Oh, wait, I do. I do need God. Second observation today. To battle pride, we must not value ourselves above others. And if you read that like me, you're going to think, oh, I don't do that. And then you start really thinking about it. Realize sometimes we do this a little more often than we'd at first think. Sometimes we don't do this as well as we would like to believe. James, in his blunt style, says this, brothers, and mind you, we've talked before in this series, that means all people when he says this. A lot of times in that culture, they only use men, and a lot of times in Scripture, they use the term for men because in the inheritance culture of that day, if they had said men and women in some of these verses, it would imply the women didn't receive an inheritance in that culture, that they were lesser. So they will deliberately look at mixed groups and call them all brothers and say, women, you are every bit as much included in this. It's contrary to how it sounds to us in English, but it's actually an inclusive way to do it. So brothers, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against his brother, or sister in our context, or judges him, speaks against the law and judges it. And if you judge the law, you are not a practitioner of the law, but a judge of it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? Literally in Greek, that first verse kind of breaks down to say, if you speak harshly about somebody else, they use the word slander in this translation. It's literally to speak harshly about. If you say negative things, if you tear down another person either to their face or behind their back, that in that point you are physically removing yourself from the position of being under God's authority. You are saying, God, I no longer stand as part of your kingdom. I no longer stand as part of your authority. Is that your throne? Okay, God, move over. I want to sit there. John MacArthur is a pastor that I don't always theologically agree with him, but I do love this one quote where he said, you know, some of us, we look at the Trinity and we start seeing if there's a vacancy that we might be able to fill. That's what's happening in this. People think, God, I want the position of God in this. I'm so awesome. I'm so good. And that person over there, they're a mess. So God, let me just take over. Let me show them how to do it right. God says, you know what you're doing? You're comparing yourself to them. And anytime we compare, there's two ways we can compare. And some of you in this room may at times struggle with this. You compare and you think, I am better. And that place, you puff yourself up probably better than what you really are. Some of you deal with low self-esteem, and you'll compare yourself with others and you think, I'm nothing. They're so much better than me. You know, neither of those is a healthy thing. Every person has some issue somewhere. Every person has something that they struggle with. Sometimes they've gotten over it through the grace of God. But I've only ever met one guy who was perfect. He just got completely crucified for it. As I often say, you guys have heard me say that many a time. When we're going through this, we sometimes have to stop and remember that other person is created in the image of God. They're wrestling with something. You know what? So am I. And we have to not compare ourselves to them. God says, you want to start a comparison game? Try comparing yourself to me. I guarantee when we do that, we don't look as good. I guarantee when we do that, we feel a little less self-righteous. So, Purdue University, they a few years back decided to do an experiment with, of all things, chickens. and they had chickens, and they started to evaluate these chickens as to which one laid a more normal amount of eggs and which ones were, as they termed them, are you ready? Super chickens. The super chickens were bigger. The super chickens were stronger. And the super chickens laid more eggs than the regular chickens. So they separated them and they created two groups. And over here they had the regular chickens. And they left them alone for 6 generations. And over here they put the super chickens. And they left them alone for 6 generations. And what's the goal of the experiment? They're hoping that the super chickens, because they have the best DNA, they're going to start mixing, and they're going to make stronger eggs that will in turn become even stronger, will in turn become even stronger. They're hoping to get a significant increase in production. You think that's what happened? Nope. You know what happened? The regular group started producing better than ever before. The super chickens, at the end of 6 generations, there were 3 left. The others all died out. And the 3 that were left were producing almost no eggs. Why? Because they spent all their time working on what you guys who own chickens are very familiar with, the pecking order. They spent all their time trying to be the best and not enough time ever trying to serve others or help others, to where the whole system broke down. That's what pride does to us. When we start looking at the others around us and comparing ourselves to them and wanting to be the best, it causes us to battle the wrong foes. And it causes us to not do what we need to do for each other. It's a hard time and it's a hard thing. Last thing, battle pride, we have to give our plans over to God. I get to take my hand off the wheel and I get to ask God to be in charge. 13-17 says this, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on our business and make a profit. You do not even know what will happen tomorrow." What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord is willing, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your proud intentions. All such boasting is evil. Anyone then who knows the right thing to do yet fails to do it is guilty of sin. How? James, could you go a little lighter on me? A few years back, there was an actor in Hollywood, not a guy that you would have ever heard of. And I'm not going to at the end say, no, it was Tom Cruise or one of the biggest names. No, it wasn't. But this was a guy who loved Jesus, but is trying to make it in Hollywood. And where he'd go on a Friday night, whether or not he'd drink, who he'd have relationships with, all this was under God's control. There was one part of his life that he was not ready to give over to God. And that was his career. So his attitude was this. Many other areas of my life I had allowed God in, but when it came to my career, I thought, I know better. I got this, God. I'm the actor here. Don't worry. It's Hollywood, and I know Hollywood, God. Everything else, God, you can have, but I'm going to run my career the way I think's best because this is what I do. I'm a professional here, and there's $100 overdrawn in his account. He has $20 in his pocket. The rent's coming due. He has almost no food in the house. And one day he breaks down and he says, God, I can't do this anymore. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought. God, I need to give this to you as well. And so he decides to give God his career. And that day, 4 checks come in the mail. Within hours of praying that prayer, he started to climb out of the hole he was in. And 2 months later, he got a call from a guy named Dallas Jenkins. Because that actor who that happened to is Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus in the show The Chosen. God, you're in charge. I'm not going to try to pick out what role anymore. God, from now on in, you tell me what role to take. And all of a sudden, his career starts to come together. Is he going to be some multimillionaire? No. But he's going to have a good living now and a good life and make a difference in the kingdom? Yep. because he gave his career to God. I say it often. The Bible doesn't guarantee that if you do things his way, everything will go easy. But as a general principle, when you do things God's way, they tend to work out. When you do things his way, it tends to be successful. To do things his way, we have to admit his way works. Have to admit we don't have all the answers to do it his way. We have to set aside our pride. The old Judge Murphy, who we opened up with today, he had a difficult public offender. Frankly, I found the guy to be obnoxious as well. I get where Judge Murphy was so upset, but he lost his temper, and because of that, he lost his career. Because of that, he suffered greatly. Imagine in that moment where that guy was being so defiant and so just rude to him. Imagine if in that moment, Judge Murphy decided to turn to God. Imagine instead of looking at that guy and saying, if I had a rock, I'd throw it at you. Imagine if he had looked at God and said, God, give me a calm heart right now, because I'm not feeling it in and of myself. Imagine if he tried to see where that other lawyer was coming from and put himself in that guy's shoes to try to take some of the bitterness out, that it's not about me, it's about trying to defend his client. What if he had said, God, you be in charge. This is your courtroom. Instead of having this is my courtroom, and I will run it my way, and I will not have somebody talking back to me. Imagine he said, God, this is your courtroom, and you get to be in charge, and I am going to submit all of this to you. He would have had a very different day that day, wouldn't he have? And I'm thinking now he wishes he could go back and do it. So guys, let me ask a tough question, one that I've had to ask myself this week. Is there an area where your pride's getting the better of you? Ask the worship team to start coming up and getting into place for a closing song. But is there an area where we are, in our hearts, not submitting the way we should to God? And not giving Him everything He needs? Is there an area where our attitude is, God, I've got this. I'll let you know if I need you? Is there an area where we're looking at other people and saying, that person's a mess, I've got it all together, I don't need to fix me first? Are we trying to take the speck out of a brother's eye without removing the 2x4 from our own? Is there an area where pride is holding us back from being everything God wants us to be? And probably most of us have something in our life right now where we're looking at going, maybe I'm not doing terribly, but I know I could be doing better. Let's sing this song to do what we talked about earlier. God said, don't compare yourself to that other person. You want to compare to me. So let's sing this song and think about who God is. And as we do, let's think, God, how do we become more like you?